June 15th, 2021. It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives, a day marked by love, promises, and new beginnings. Pastor Ethan Cole and Judge Olivia Thompson had just exchanged their vows, pledging to spend forever together. The world saw a perfect couple, destined for greatness. But what no one could have known was that just hours later, their wedding night would take a horrific turn. In the early hours of that night, one of them would be dead, and the other, a man of faith, would stand accused of the unthinkable. How did it happen? What caused a man who had vowed to lead a life of love and peace to take the life of the woman he had just married? Was it something that began before the wedding night? A hidden truth no one saw coming? Or did the events of that evening push him over the edge? In a story filled with shocking twists, the answer lies hidden beneath a veil of secrets, resentment, and spoken tension. But the truth will only come out once the silence is broken. A marriage built on vows of eternal love, now shattered in a moment of rage and confusion. What happened that night will forever be remembered, not as the beginning of a beautiful story, but as the beginning of a tragedy no one could have predicted. Pastor Ethan Cole was the kind of man who could command a room without saying a word. Tall, charming, with a presence that left people feeling at ease. His voice, smooth and calm, had a way of making even the most difficult truth seem manageable. For years, he had led his congregation with unwavering faith, guiding them through moments of hardship, offering wisdom and hope when others couldn't. But Ethan wasn't just a pastor. He was a man with ambitions, desires, and a complicated past that, until that night, had remained locked away. He was a man known for his grace in the eyes of his church, a man who could inspire, but his own emotions were rarely exposed to those who followed him. Beneath the polished surface, Ethan was carrying his own burdens, silent struggles no one would ever see. And then there was Olivia. Judge Olivia Thompson, a woman of intellect, a towering figure in the courtroom. She didn't just uphold the law, she was the law, with a sharp mind and a quick wit. Olivia earned the respect of her peers and the admiration of everyone who met her. Beneath her tough exterior, however, there was a softer side that few got to see. Olivia had worked hard for everything she had. Her journey to becoming a respected judge hadn't been easy, but her dedication and commitment had paid off. In the public eye, she was a model of success, a woman who had it all: beauty, brains, and a powerful career. Together, Ethan and Olivia seemed like the perfect pair. They were opposites in some ways. Her commanding presence balanced his calm demeanor. Their individual strengths seemed to complement each other perfectly. To the outside world, they were the picture of harmony, a couple meant to be. But was it as perfect as it appeared? Behind closed doors, the reality of their marriage wasn't as simple as it seemed. Despite their success, there were cracks, hidden tensions, and secrets neither wanted to confront. Neither wanted to admit that even their union could be strained. What could have gone wrong between two such seemingly perfect people? How could a night that was supposed to be the culmination of their dream become the night that ended it all? What do you think could break such a beautiful union? Let's dive deeper. The day had unfolded like a fairy tale. The ceremony was beautiful, every detail flawless, as if it had been carefully crafted for the perfect moment. The couple exchanged vows in front of a crowd of family, friends, and loved ones, their faces filled with smiles and laughter. The reception hall, adorned with soft lighting, candles flickering gently in the background, created an atmosphere of warmth and love. The sounds of music filled the air as guests danced, toasting to the new couple, celebrating the start of a life together. For most people, this would be the kind of day they dreamed of, a new beginning full of promise and hope. And for a moment, it seemed as if nothing could ruin it. But what no one knew, as they laughed and danced, was that behind the closed doors of their hotel room, a storm was quietly building. The tension that had been simmering under the surface for weeks, maybe even months, was about to explode. As the evening came to a close, the newlyweds retreated to their hotel room in downtown Chicago, the door closing softly behind them. What was supposed to be a night of passion, celebration, and joy quickly shifted to something much darker. In the quiet of that hotel room, something was changing. The room, which had once been filled with the sounds of excitement, was now eerily silent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The couple, once full of hope and anticipation, stood in the stillness, facing a reality neither could have predicted. What began as a night of celebration would soon descend into something far worse. The air was thick with unspoken words, tension hanging between them. What they hadn't realized was that this moment, their wedding night, would become the night that shattered everything. What had once been a night of pure joy was now on the verge of something that would haunt them forever. As the door clicked shut behind them, the weight of the day seemed to lift, and the couple, for a moment, shed a quiet smile. It was the calm after the storm of the wedding ceremony, the perfect time to unwind. They had just entered the room, and it was finally their time to be alone, to enjoy the night that was meant to be the beginning of their happily ever after. Pastor Ethan poured 2 glasses of champagne. The bubbles fizzed as he handed one to Olivia. They clinked glasses, a soft laugh escaping Olivia's lips. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing had changed. The night was still young, their dreams still fresh. The conversation was light, easy, about the wedding, their plans for the future. The atmosphere was one of warmth and affection. But beneath that initial ease, something was starting to shift. The champagne, sweet and effervescent, filled the room with its subtle scent. But as the night wore on, something else began to intrude on the peaceful silence. Olivia, who had once appeared perfect in his eyes, seemed somehow different. Ethan, who had always admired every aspect of his bride, noticed at first the subtle change in her demeanor, a shift in the air. At first, it was unnoticeable, almost imperceptible. But as the minutes passed, it became harder to ignore. There was a smell, a faint odor that lingered in the air, something that wasn't there before. To Ethan, it was overpowering. It wasn't the scent of the day, the flowers, the perfume, but something else. Something wrong. He tried to brush it aside, attributing it to the stress of the day, the exhaustion from the long hours of the wedding. But the longer he sat there, the more he couldn't escape it. The smell grew stronger, more distinct. He found it hard to concentrate. His mind raced. He tried to focus on Olivia's face, the woman he had just married, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the odor. Why was this happening? He had never noticed anything like it before. It wasn't as if Olivia smelled unclean. He knew her well, and she took great care of herself. But in that moment, his mind seemed to focus on this one detail. Something about it triggered him. A small, almost subconscious irritation that began to build into something darker, something deeper. It was a rage, inexplicable and sudden, flooding through him like a tide. A storm that had been lying dormant beneath his calm exterior, now rising to the surface. His perfect bride, the woman who had walked down the aisle just hours ago, suddenly seemed far from perfect. As the minutes ticked by, Ethan's mind raced. Could it be possible that this simple thing, this smell, was enough to unravel everything? Was it a sign of something deeper? Something he hadn't noticed before, a flaw, a hidden imperfection, or a betrayal of some kind that no one had seen coming. But the more Ethan thought about it, the more intense his reaction became. What had once been a beautiful evening, a celebration of their love, was now becoming a moment of discomfort and suspicion. The woman he had chosen to spend the rest of his life with now felt unfamiliar. As Olivia laughed softly, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him, Ethan's thoughts grew darker. His hands trembled slightly. His grip on his glass tightened. His smile, once genuine, faltered. The tension in the room was palpable. It wasn't something anyone could see, but it was there, hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. The silence grew longer between them, and with each passing second, Ethan's thoughts seemed to spiral further. But then something snapped. What happened next would change everything. It was a moment so sudden, so unexpected, that it would forever alter the course of their lives. Hold on. What you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Have you ever had a relationship that suddenly felt different? Where one small thing changed everything? Let me know in the comments. What do you think it could have been in this case? Ethan Cole had always been known for his patience. As a pastor, he was a man who preached peace, understanding, and grace. His congregation admired his calm demeanor, the way he handled conflict without ever losing his cool. But tonight, the calm man who had walked down the aisle with Olivia was no longer there. There was a sudden explosion of emotion that even he couldn't have predicted. In that moment, as the smell grew stronger, everything that had been hidden beneath the surface came rushing forward, like a floodgate that couldn't be closed. Before he knew it, his hands were shaking. His thoughts were scattered. The rage, he couldn't control it. It was overwhelming. And the moment everything fell apart happened in an instant. Olivia, who had been looking down at her glass, lifted her head just as Ethan reached the tipping point. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. The once beautiful wedding suite, now filled with the haunting silence of a life lost, was no longer a place of joy but a crime scene. The door was broken open, and officers flooded the room, their eyes immediately falling on the bloody body of Olivia. Ethan was there, standing near the window, his hands trembling, his eyes distant and unfocused. He had no words, no explanation, just a broken look of a man who had made the ultimate decision, one that had destroyed everything. And there it was, the evidence, blood stains soaking the bed, the pillow, the sheets. The horror of the night laid bare. The sound of the police radios crackling in the distance felt like a slow, crushing reminder that there was no escape now. But the question remained, what drove him to commit such an act? Was it a moment of madness, a fleeting break in his mind that led him to snap? Or had something darker been at play all along, a hidden part of him that had always been there, waiting to be unleashed? What was the true reason for this senseless violence? A momentary lapse in judgment, or something much deeper, something buried in the darkness of Ethan's mind? The shock of the crime scene sent ripples through the local police department. The hotel room, once filled with the sounds of laughter and joy, was now an eerie, silent place of tragedy. As detectives and officers arrived at the scene, they were met with the grim reality of what had transpired. Crime scene photos, bloodstained sheets, and the lifeless body of Judge Olivia Thompson were the only witnesses to the horrifying events that had unfolded just hours earlier. But there was something strange about the scene. Ethan Cole, the man at the center of it all, was nowhere to be found. His absence sent a shiver of unease through the officers, raising questions. Was he running from the crime? Did he know the gravity of what he had done, or did he have a shocking explanation? Something that could clear his name, or at least provide some insight into the darkness that had led him to commit such a brutal act. As detectives began to search the hotel and the surrounding area for any sign of Pastor Ethan, the questions continued to mount. How could a man who had seemed so calm, so in control, have snapped in such a violent way? What was it that drove him to take the life of the woman he had just married? Ethan had vanished, but the truth wouldn't remain hidden for long. It wasn't long before the police received an unexpected phone call. Ethan had been found not far from the hotel, walking aimlessly down a quiet street. His expression was distant and vacant. He had no clear explanation for where he had been or what had happened after the crime. But what he said next sent shockwaves through the investigators. Ethan claimed that the events of that night hadn't gone down the way the police might have imagined. According to him, it wasn't a calculated act of violence, it was self-defense. Ethan insisted that Olivia had attacked him. The story he told was one of fear, panic, and a desperate need to protect himself. She came at me. I had no choice. She was going to hurt me. His voice, shaky but firm, relayed a version of the night that the police had not expected. He said Olivia had grown violent after they began arguing, that something inside her had snapped, and that he had only reacted to defend himself from her assault. The accusations seemed bizarre, considering the evidence in the room. No signs of struggle from Olivia. No physical indication that she had attacked him in any way. But Ethan stood by his story, even as the officers questioned his increasingly erratic behavior. His eyes darted, his hands twitched, his voice was filled with confusion. He wasn't making sense. His claims were unsubstantiated. And yet, there was something about his demeanor that suggested he believed them. Was this the ravings of a man who had cracked under the weight of his own guilt, or was there something more to his story? As detectives began to sift through the evidence, examining forensic reports, photos of the scene, and speaking to the hotel staff, they found no evidence to support Ethan's claims. No signs of Olivia becoming violent. No wounds on his body to suggest he had been attacked. In fact, everything pointed to one horrifying truth. The act was not one of self-defense, but an act of cold, calculated murder. Still, the more they dug, the more they uncovered strange inconsistencies in Ethan's story. How had he made it out of the room so quickly? Why did he leave the crime scene without attempting to help or call for assistance? There were too many unanswered questions. But despite the mounting evidence against him, Ethan held on to his story. Something had triggered him. Something that made him feel as if he had no choice but to defend himself. What do you think? Did Pastor Ethan really snap in the heat of the moment? Or is there something darker at play here? Could he be hiding something deeper? Drop your thoughts in the comments. As the investigation continued, the truth behind Pastor Ethan Cole's violent actions began to unfold in unexpected ways. What initially seemed like an isolated, explosive incident was actually part of something much darker, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for months, if not years. The police didn't just search through the crime scene. They dug deep into the couple's past. What they uncovered shocked even the most seasoned detectives. The tension that had been building even while they were courting wasn't a result of one moment, but a series of unresolved issues, secrets, and unmet expectations. The smell, the catalyst for the violent outburst, was only the final spark in their new marriage, which was already full of cracks. Flashbacks to their time together began to paint a much clearer picture. In the months leading up to their wedding, Olivia and Ethan had faced increasing tension. The perfect couple, often seen laughing and holding hands, had been hiding something far more dangerous. There were constant arguments, disagreements that had never been addressed, and a growing sense of disillusionment between them. Olivia, the driven and ambitious judge, had always been fiercely independent. But Ethan, the pastor who had built his life on faith, was struggling with feelings of inadequacy. Beneath his calm exterior, there were insecurities that had never been fully confronted. And as Olivia's career began to take off, as she gained more recognition and respect, Ethan's resentment grew, an emotion he buried under the guise of being a loving and supportive husband. It wasn't just his insecurities that were festering, though. Ethan had a past, one filled with unresolved trauma from his childhood, painful memories of neglect and a series of unhealthy relationships. These scars had never fully healed. He had convinced himself that Olivia, his beautiful and successful wife, was the answer to all his problems. But in reality, his buried anger and fear only grew as the pressure of their union weighed on him. One of the most disturbing discoveries in the investigation was the growing tension over their differences in lifestyle and values. Olivia, as a judge, was used to authority, power, and a sense of control. She worked long hours, leaving little room for romantic gestures or quiet moments between the two. Ethan, on the other hand, had always craved closeness, intimacy, and constant reassurance. He wanted a partner who would affirm him, who would make him feel needed. The deeper they got into their relationship, the clearer it became that their needs weren't being met, but they chose to ignore the signs. But what truly shocked the investigators was the realization that the smell, the catalyst for that horrifying moment, was just a physical manifestation of Ethan's deeper disgust with Olivia. The frustration he felt, hidden behind his smile, buried beneath his faith, had finally erupted. The smell didn't simply represent a minor annoyance. It became a symbol of his perceived failure as a husband, a trigger for his insecurities, and a deeper reflection of how he had failed to meet the needs of both himself and his wife. It was more than a simple moment of frustration. It was a violent reaction to everything that had gone wrong in their relationship. Ethan's rage wasn't about the smell. It was about everything else that had been festering beneath the surface. It was about the emotional distance, the silent resentments, the buried trauma, and his inability to cope with the growing pressure. What we learned next would completely change everything we thought we knew about this relationship. The truth wasn't just that Ethan snapped. It wasn't just the culmination of a few moments of frustration. The deeper truth was far more disturbing. But the truth is even more twisted than we could have imagined. The murder of Judge Olivia Thompson shocked the nation, and the trial that followed became a media frenzy. The courtroom was filled to capacity as journalists snapped photos, broadcasting the proceedings to the world. The public was captivated, their eyes glued to the unfolding drama. Was Pastor Ethan Cole's brutal act a crime of passion, or was it something far more sinister, cold, calculated, and premeditated? The world watched, waiting for the truth. As the trial went on, the tension in the air was palpable. Everyone seemed to have their own opinion on Ethan's guilt. Was he a man pushed to the brink by his own emotional turmoil, or was he a man who had hidden his true nature behind the facade of faith and good intentions? People who had once admired him as a spiritual leader now questioned everything they thought they knew about him. Could a man who had taken vows of love and devotion to his wife truly be capable of such a heinous act? The courtroom was divided, with some believing his claims of self-defense, while others saw a cold-blooded killer, a man who had hidden his anger and rage for far too long. Ethan's defense attorney painted him as a man of faith who had simply snapped in the heat of the moment. He described a man who had spent years serving his community, leading a congregation, and supporting his wife in her career. According to his lawyer, Ethan was under immense pressure, living in the shadow of his successful wife, struggling with feelings of inadequacy, and unable to cope with the emotional strain. The argument of self-defense was central to the defense's case. Ethan had been attacked by his wife. He had no choice but to protect himself. But the prosecution was relentless. They dug deeper into Ethan's past, uncovering disturbing truths about his upbringing, his relationships, and his struggles with anger and control. They presented evidence that contradicted Ethan's version of the events, highlighting the inconsistencies in his story and the lack of any proof that Olivia had attacked him. They argued that the murder was planned, a product of the simmering rage he had built up over months and years of resentment. But the most shocking twist came when Ethan's defense attorney revealed something that stunned the entire courtroom: a letter. One that Ethan had written in the months before the murder came to light. In it, Ethan expressed deep concerns about his relationship. He wrote about his frustrations with Olivia's success and his growing feelings of inadequacy. He spoke about the emotional distance that had developed between them and his own fears that he was losing control over his life. The letter revealed a man who had been struggling with far more than just surface-level issues. Did Pastor Ethan even deserve to be called a man of faith? Or was he hiding a far darker secret? Ethan Cole's life was forever changed that night. The man who had once been seen as a beacon of faith, a pillar of his community, now stood as a symbol of something darker, something far removed from the life he once claimed to lead. But as his trial came to a close and the verdict was read, the questions surrounding this case remained. Was this an isolated incident of a man losing control, or was there something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface, hidden behind the mask of a man of God? The public was left with lingering doubts. They wondered how someone so outwardly devoted, so committed to a life of faith, could commit such an unimaginable act. Were there more secrets buried in his past? More hidden fears and unresolved trauma that had never been addressed? Or had the weight of his insecurities, compounded by the pressures of his relationship, finally broken him beyond repair? These are the questions that still remain unanswered. Ethan Cole was convicted of murder, and his life behind bars would be a reflection of the night that forever altered the lives of those around him. But for Olivia's family, the devastation never truly ended. They were left with the haunting memory of a woman who had so much promise, whose life was tragically cut short. The questions surrounding her death would linger unanswered for years to come. So, what can we take away from this? This case serves as a reminder that even the most seemingly perfect relationships can hide dark secrets, and that unresolved emotions, insecurities, and past trauma can have deadly consequences. It also reminds us that there's often more to the story than what meets the eye, more beneath the surface waiting to be uncovered. What do you think? Was this truly a moment of madness, or was there something darker at play? Leave your thoughts below, and make sure you subscribe for more shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And if you enjoyed this video, share it with your friends who love true crime. See you next time.